Hello and welcome back to my channel. Bonsoir et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this video will be October's reading wrap-up. This past month was interesting reading-wise and personal life-wise. Reading-wise, I read a total of 14 books. It would have been 12 books actually, but the first 2 books I finished in October actually started reading in September, but I couldn't mention them in my September reading wrap-up. So 14 books. Wow, how did that happen? Especially given I have been fairly distracted this past month for personal life reasons. This time around, I'm going to go by category of publication like I did in September. I'm pretty sure I'm going to start with the graphic stuff, then move on to the non-fiction before wrapping up with the fiction. So first, I'm just going to get out of the way the 2 last volumes of Monstress I read in October. So there's volume 5, War Child, and the latest volume which came out in September, I'm pretty sure, The Vow. So I reread volume 5 so as to go into volume 6 feeling caught up with everything. And this series continues to be amazing. I love the art style, I love the story, the characters, the themes. It's definitely one of my favorite ongoing graphic novel series alongside Saga, though I probably have a slight preference for this one ultimately. And you know, it's an ongoing series, so I can't really say much about this without going into major spoiler territory. Then I borrowed something from the library. It's called Pénis de table, written and illustrated by Kalkair Cie. That was basically a volume of graphic non-fiction exploring male sexuality. The idea is that the author gathered a bunch of friends, acquaintances of different sexual orientations, ages, things like that, to talk about sex from a male perspective, to share experiences. There were 5 or 6 major themes. There was masturbation, fantasies, first experiences, relationships, things like that. Overall, I was pretty disappointed by it. I thought it was pretty superficial. There were also some problematic elements to do with consent and just not really digging into the whys of certain subjects like pornography or male and female relationships for those men who were heterosexual. So I was a bit uncomfortable at times, even though it's a subject that really interests me, human sexuality and obviously male and female sexuality more specifically, but didn't really go into any kind of depth, which I felt it really needed at times. It's a good idea, is how I'll put it. It's a good idea, but the execution was mediocre. I'd definitely be interested in reading something like this again in the future, provided it was done in a more thoughtful and analytical way, I guess. I did enjoy the personal experience aspect, but the men present in this book were just of a certain type, I guess, and it didn't give the greatest image of men or male sexuality either. So yeah, I have very conflicted feelings about it overall, and was disappointed, like I said. And then I read this little wholesome gem, A Honk in Your Heart by Annika Howells. A Honk in Your Heart is this bundle of positivity brought to you through pictures of Alex the honking bird and his son, Dominic, or Dommy as he's known on the internet. Alex the cockatiel was this internet bird celebrity, I suppose. I follow the account on Instagram, but there's also a YouTube account that went with Alex and now Dominic. They're just these adorable little cockatiels, and their human brings a lot of positivity through them, and it's a bird net thing, though I would encourage you to check it out if you need some eye bleach, if you need something to pick you up in this sad, depressing world, if you enjoy animals just more generally, just bringing you a bundle of positivity, like I said, and warm and fuzzy feelings. And I guess it's very moving in a way because Alex passed away last year, I think, not that long after my own baby dinosaur passed away. So I was very, very saddened when Alex died, but you know, his human decided to make something good out of that, so she created this little book. And I mean, you read this in a sitting, it's tiny, but it's just so effing cute and wholesome and warm. And yes, I cried when I read this. Sue me, because birds and fluffy dinosaurs. And that's all I have to say about that. So I read Pénis de table by Kalkair Cie. I decided to read that because I'd seen his newest volume of graphic non-fiction. I saw it in a bookstore, then researched the author-illustrator and saw that he'd done this thing about male sexuality. And then I read his newest, which is De polyamour et d'eau fraîche. It's based on a French expression, d'amour et d'eau fraîche, when people, you know, very in love and they think they can just subsist on love and fresh water. So this is kind of a primer on polyamory specifically and ethical non-monogamy more generally. Basically, the author-illustrator lived in a throuple with two women, one of those women being his wife of 10 years and another woman. And apparently they shared their experiences on an Instagram account and people asked a lot of questions, and so they took 50 of the most recurring questions and they created this book. I was actually pleasantly surprised by this one. I thought it was a really good primer on the subject of ethical non-monogamy. It's a subject I'm already reasonably well versed in, so I just wanted to see how they would approach the subject, how accurate the information provided would be, and things like that. And it covered a lot of ground. It was pretty in-depth, contrary to Pénis, actually. I guess I wasn't super convinced, or I mean, I was a bit confused by their definition of solo polyamory, but fine, it's a detail. I really like the fact that they stress that non-monogamy is not better than monogamy, it's just an option for relating intimately to other human beings. Different options will suit different types of people. The most important thing is that people be aware that there are, in fact, different ways of doing things. And they really stressed that throughout, and there was a good amount of feminist-adjacent awareness. There was a lot of discussion about consent. I guess it did get a wee bit too woke for me on the margins, but overall not enough to actually really bother me. So yeah, if you speak French and you want to learn more about ethical non-monogamy, you could do worse than pick this one up. It's really decently informative and well put together. And finally, somewhat related, because it kind of has to do again with human sexuality and relationships, I read this beautiful little book, Le Plaisir by María Hesse. I say it that way because apparently the author-illustrator is Spanish. I thought she was German, but no, she's Spanish, so it was translated from the Spanish. I came across this by pure chance as I was browsing on Amazon, I think. I noticed this beautiful cover illustration, so wanted to know more, and it said that it mentioned or referenced a lot of great female figures from mythology, history, literature, like Anaïs Nin or Simone de Beauvoir, so I was intrigued. And this was lovely, very poetic, very beautiful. It's a mixture of graphic non-fiction and graphic memoir. The author recounts her experience of female sexuality and female pleasure, more specifically, whilst also calling back to these female figures which she has found inspiring, which have helped women reconnect with their bodies, with their sexuality throughout time. She also links back to foundational myths about female sexuality, both positive and negative. The negative ones being of a Christian nature because she was raised Catholic. So yeah, Anaïs Nin is referenced, Simone de Beauvoir, Anne Sexton, Mata Hari, figures such as Lilith, Mary Magdalene, Sappho, things like that. For personal reasons, I basically read this at the exact perfect time, so it really spoke to me quite strongly. There was just a lot of delicacy to it. The illustrations are quite pretty as well. I'm going to try and find one which isn't too explicit because there are illustrations of sex in this. Like, for example, this represents Sappho and the author represents herself as well in this book, and there are excerpts of poetry in there as well, or I mean songwriting. So yeah, I just found it strongly resonating with some things I'm feeling myself and going through. So this was actually quite therapeutic in a way. Now, for that kind of illustration, my god tier standard is still Anaïs Nin sur la mer des mensonges, but this was very good as well. The only thing where I was like, I do not agree, is that the author conflated some of the thematic explorations in A Song of Ice and Fire and those that were unforgivably botched in the Game of Thrones TV adaptation. And I was like, no. That's not on George R.R. Martin. That's on the freaking showrunners. Not the same thing here, so I could clearly tell that she hadn't read the book, she'd just seen the TV series, and I was like very pissed. Well, no, I wasn't very pissed off, but I was like, nope, you're wrong. But apart from that, it really was very beautiful. So I would definitely recommend this if you can get it in a language you understand. Moving on to the non-fiction. So this month I read 3 books of non-fiction. First, I read Trance When Ideology Meets Reality, written by Helen Joyce, who is a journalist working for The Economist. She's quite high up, actually, at The Economist, I think. She's like a senior editor or something. I love this book. Another great example of gender-critical analysis, along with Material Girls, written by Professor Kathleen Stock. I would definitely recommend you read both of these books side by side, or I mean one after the other. This was just so well researched. Thorough, in-depth, a great analysis, perhaps even a better overall analysis of this topic than Material Girls, actually. Material Girls really goes into the philosophical aspects of it and is perhaps just slightly more academic in tone, which I really enjoyed. This might be slightly more accessible, I guess. I'm not going to go into the whys and hows of this stuff and how I'm interested in this topic. If you want more information about that, you can check my September reading wrap-up, where I went into a bit more detail regarding Material Girls. I was familiar with everything, or near enough to it, in this book. The author also has a lot of humor, but is, just like Professor Kathleen Stock, very respectful, very concise, and not hateful at all. It's sad that we have to keep repeating this stuff, but no, there is no hatred in this book at all, unless you think that, you know, saying things like, oh, there are two sexes in human beings is hateful. I mean, okay. Two noteworthy things, though, that I really appreciated. There was a comment made in here about some worrying parallels there are between some aspects of modern queer theory-based activism and the pro-pedo movement there was in the 1970s, which is something I've been saying for a long while now, and I felt extremely bloody vindicated to see someone else acknowledge this. And I also really enjoyed the analysis Helen Joyce made of some of the fundamental differences between US-based activism and UK/somewhat European-based activism. She was absolutely 1000% right on the money. This is the kind of stuff I've been noticing for a few years now, and yeah, because it can get very frustrating sometimes when US commentators just don't understand that things are different in Europe and the UK, and it doesn't really work exactly the same way. There was lots of injustice and inequality in Europe and the UK, but it doesn't necessarily get expressed in the same way as it does in the US because of differing histories. I did have some minor disagreements with the author, but that's perfectly fine. I wasn't always super clear about what kind of point she was trying to make with regards to phenomena of social contagion. Maybe it's because I'm just slightly sensitive about issues of mental health, and like, she wasn't really reducing things like anorexia or self-harm to just phenomena of social contagion, but I guess it could have been read that way just slightly, and so that was a bit meh to me. Otherwise, I didn't have any major disagreements. Like I said, it's a great analysis of the topic, and it's extremely up-to-date. It came out this year. So if you're interested in this topic and want a well-written, non-hateful take on it and, you know, good analysis of it, go for this, most definitely, but also do check out Material Girls by Professor Kathleen Stock. Then switching gears completely, I officially read the worst, or I mean the most disappointing book of nonfiction of 2021, and that was Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. This is the kind of book that made me so pissed, I actually legitimately threw it across the room. Normally, I'm not pro-violence against books, but I just could not contain myself there, so I wrote out a very long review on my Goodreads. I'll leave the link to it in the description because I don't really want to go into all of that detail again here. Suffice it to say, I thought it was a hot mess of confusing things and not being super clear about the angle with which to explore the subject of fungi, mushrooms, and their connection with other life forms. It was a lot of, oh, but we can't really categorize living organisms anyway, but we're going to talk about mushrooms. So it's like, is it one or the other? And there was a lot of wishy-washy pseudo-spiritual bullshit injected in this. I don't necessarily mind mixing spirituality and science. I am not an atheist. I am a spiritual person, and I am also science-minded. But there's a right way of doing it and there's a wrong way of doing it. This to me fell into the latter category. Some of the basic stuff you would expect from a pop science book was definitely absent. There's never any concrete definition of a fungal organism given, but then it goes into super advanced territory. So I was really confused about the target audience for this book. As someone who studied a teensy bit of mycology at university as part of a botany module, that is a legitimate criticism though, is that unfortunately a lot of universities kind of fold mycology anthropology into botany when the subject definitely deserves its own research departments. So, I mean, I knew a lot of the basic stuff presented here, but some of the more basic stuff, which would have been, in my mind, interesting to completely lay people, was absent. Then it goes into super advanced stuff, which I got, but then I saw on Goodreads that a lot of people just couldn't really follow. So it's like not good enough for someone who has some scientific knowledge. It's not quite good enough for people who don't have any kind of scientific knowledge. And then it goes into a lot of trippy stuff about, well, I mean, I'm the first one to preach for psychedelics, but this dude got me to be annoyed at that, which I guess I have to respect him for that achievement. But it's like, fine, stop preaching for your choir so bloody much. And talking a lot about Terence McKenna, fine, I've read a Terence McKenna book, it was very interesting, but that's more anthropology than anything else. It is related to mushrooms somewhat, but he goes into a lot of meta stuff and not actual mycological science. It's like, what are you doing here, mate? This book was a mess. It was just an absolute mess. And he repeats himself all the bloody time. It's like, mushroom are these magical things which connect everything in this beautiful web of life. It's not a message I necessarily disagree with on a personal level, but for a pop science book, I don't think that's acceptable at all. If you want to do a pop science book and not some kind of spirituality-based book, yeah, it just felt very preachy, and I absolutely loathe that in my nonfiction. If you start preaching at me, I'm gonna hate you. I could go into more detail, but like I said, I wrote out a really long review on Goodreads if you want to check it out. It was just so bloody aggravating. And I like mushrooms! I'm a fan of fungi. This should have been right up my alley, and it wasn't. Thus I was pissed. I couldn't wait to be finished with this book. I really could have DNF'd it, but I was like, fine, I'll see it through. Was not rewarded for it, because that's just always how it goes, isn't it? But yeah, I would not personally recommend this. Some people find it great. Good for them. I guess they like the mixture of wishy-washy, woo-woo-y spiritual bullshit with some science. Personally, I don't think that's good enough, but okay, to each their own. So no, if you have any interest in actual science about mushrooms, try and find something else, because I don't think this is the right book for your needs. And finally, I read Why We Dream by Alice Robb. This is a fairly short non-fiction book about the science of dreaming. I think it's a good introduction to the subject, basically. I've already read a lot about sleeping and dreaming because I myself have a very, very, very active and vivid eneric life. Always have. I've even experienced lucid dreams, I've experienced hypnagogia as well, and I really enjoyed those altered states of consciousness. So I'm already decently well versed in the subject, but I just wanted to see if I could learn something new. I did learn interesting tidbits about the research that has been conducted into sleep and dreaming. So I think it definitely has interesting things to offer. It did remain fairly basic overall though, so that's why I would place it in the category of good introductions, maybe not the most thorough overview of the subject. It does delve into lucid dreaming as well, more specifically. Quite a bit, in fact, because I think that's what interested the author the most. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It was a worthwhile read. It was a solid 7 out of 10 or 6.5 to 7 out of 10. So again, if you want to dip your toes into the subject, you could do worse than go with this introduction in my book. Now moving on to the fiction, so at the tail end of September and the very beginning of October, I read Piranesi, written by Susanna Clarke, and this was absolutely forgettable. It didn't do much of anything for me. It wasn't offensively bad either, like I wasn't annoyed or angry. I really didn't have any kind of expectation going in. Not really going to go into the plot because it would get spoiled very easily. But I get the sense that there's some riffing off of the concept of memory palaces, maybe. And the setting in this book is interesting, original. There was something to the atmosphere in it, but beyond that, I didn't really care about the characters. I didn't really care about the plot. I didn't think there was much depth to the theme or even the world building beyond that basic setting and perhaps riffing off of the memory palace concept, which I do like, but it didn't really go anywhere. So I felt like there was a lot of unexploited potential in a way, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the intent of the author was, and it doesn't really matter in my book. It was whatever. I think I gave it a 4 out of 10, but it's not an aggressive 4 out of 10. It just wasn't good, but it wasn't offensively bad either. And I wasn't specifically annoyed that I didn't like it, so I'm definitely not against the idea of reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because I've been told it's very, very different from this, so I still might give that one a try in the future. Then of course, you know, I arranged my TBR for October to reflect the fact that October is Spooktober, and Witchtober more specifically. However, before I get to the witchy part, I did go through the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because why not? I figured, you know, it's a short classic, so might as well add it to my belt. And there as well, it was completely forgettable. Nothing that interesting about it. Ultimately, I guess the intro was very, well, I mean, the intro was interesting. I don't know that it was very interesting, but it was interesting, and it helped to give me some context for the text I then read, because the text itself wasn't that engaging ultimately. Musings about good and evil, I mean, the good and evil parts of human nature, that weird gimmick of taking a potion to bring out one side over the other, because that person is completely split personality-wise into this horrific figure and this good figure, and it was okay, it was a weird gimmick, I guess. Basically, the thing is, I think it's a bit too old in a way, because now exploring the nuanced aspects of human nature is so freaking popular in fiction, and most notably SFF fiction, with the explosion of like grey morality, grey characters, grim dark fantasy, and just things along those lines. So I feel like that idea has been developed and explored in a much more fleshed out way since then. I guess it's interesting as an item in the history of literature, but beyond that, I don't really see the draw to this classic. But fine, I read it, so another one down the hatch. And again, I wasn't offended either. It wasn't offensively bad, I was just basically a bit bored, but it was extremely short, so I read it in, what, 3 days? It's fine. Now getting to Witchtober proper, because yes, I read 3 books with witch in the title. First, I read through the third and final H.P. Lovecraft anthology created by S.T. Joshi, The Dreams in the Witch House and Other Weird Stories. And well, it's good old reliable Lovecraft, as I've decided to call him, because why not? I like H.P. Lovecraft's Sue Me. It's like, it's fun, weird, horror fiction, horror science fiction, I guess, more than fantasy fiction, though. It's weird, so it mixes stuff, because that is the hallmark of weird fiction, ultimately. I took a bit longer to read through this than I usually would have, because I got distracted by personal life things, and I guess going through the dream quest of a known Kadath, I got not bored, but I lost the flow of it. I got out of it, and getting back into it was a bit hard, so I listened to bits of it too in audio format, but overall it was just fun. Plus, I'm sorry, but immense respect for a man that puts in one of his stories an army of cats to battle eldritch horrors. That's freaking cool. I'm sorry, that's just cool. If you disagree, you're objectively wrong. So yeah, and yes, the horror at Red Hook is in this anthology. Very, very hot take, undoubtedly, but I expected a lot worse, because I've always read that it was the most horrifically racist of his stories, and yes, it's definitely racist and xenophobic, but I don't know, being aware of how horrible the world can actually get, I was expecting a lot worse. He's a good old reliable, that's what I call him. I enjoyed also one of the stories which, you know, draws parallels to At the Mountains of Madness, and that was a lot of fun, and I can see myself coming back to these stories in the future. Most definitely. Now I have all 3 of those anthologies. Maybe one day I'll splurge and invest in some kind of fancy illustrated edition if I can find one to my tastes. So I'm very happy I finished this first, in any case, exploration of H.P. Lovecraft's fiction. And then in the last, well no, not the last 2 weeks, the last week and a half of October, because my schedule got jostled about just a bit, I read these 2. The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson and The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec. I plan on doing a dual review for both these, a witchy dual review. Ideally, it should have been done for the end of October, for Halloween, but alas, it shall come out in the beginning of November. First, I'll say a few words about this. So The Year of the Witching is, well, a book that involves witchcraft in a secondary universe where there's a very patriarchal society and women are feared because they are conceptualized as being aligned with a dark mother goddess who birthed witches and things of that general idea. The thing is, I'm pretty certain this is young adult fiction, or I mean, that's how it read to me, and I just don't do young adult fiction anymore. I say this because it was very light on the theming, on the world building. There were some hallmarks of young adult fiction, the romance at the heart of it, which I called kilometers away. I liked a lot of the imagery present in this book. The visceral, witchcraft, dark pagan-related imagery. I think there's a lot of potential for this author to grow as a writer, perhaps one day writing adult fiction. So yeah, but it was very much, to me, an example of young adult literature. Not bad young adult literature, but since I don't really do that age range anymore, I was a bit, not even disappointed, I guess, but it just was very obvious to me that it was young adult. If I'd known that beforehand, I never would have read this. It was enjoyable for what it was, but I'll get into a bit more detail in that dual review. After that, however, I read The Witch's Heart, like I said, by Genevieve Gornichec, and I love this. I finished this today. It wrecked my heart. I haven't cried so hard because of a book since finishing the Withering Flame trilogy back in the spring of this year. It just hit me in the feels, and I didn't quite expect that, to be honest. I was impressed. It's basically a retelling of Norse mythology, more specifically Ragnarok, or some of the events leading to Ragnarok, centering on the character of Angrboda, who was Loki's wife and the mother of Hel, the goddess of the Norse underworld, Jormungandr, this giant serpent, and Fenrir, the great wolf, which has a very important role to play in Ragnarok alongside Jormungandr and Hel. In fact, I didn't notice this at first. The three of them are actually interwoven in Angrboda's hair, which I think is a lovely little detail. You have Hel here, Jormungandr here, and Fenrir right here. And yeah, I was really impressed by this retelling, a proper mythology retelling. I say this because I was very disappointed when I read Circe 2 years ago, around the time, well, was it around the time of Halloween? No, but I made a review around the time of Halloween in 2019. And again, I don't think Circe is bad, I was just very disappointed by it. Here my expectations were right where they're supposed to be, and I was extremely pleasantly surprised by this. There was beautiful character work done in this book, and relational character work done as well, and interweaving those elements of mythology. Yes, give me mythology, more. I gobble that stuff up, especially since, you know, it's not, for once, Greco-Roman mythology, it's actually Norse mythology. No, and don't at me with the Marvel bullshit, that's not a proper mythological retelling in my book, okay? Just nope. But I'll get into more detail with this one as well in my upcoming dual witchy review. Now, in the month of October, I also inaugurated my new series, A Bookworm in Gamerland, in which I'll allow myself to review some of my favorite video games. The first episode was about Bloodborne, and the second episode was about Hollow Knight. In the month of November, I will be reading way less than I did this month, primarily because I'm going to be going through the Poppy War trilogy, and I will not add in anything besides that whilst I'll be reading through these three reasonably thick books. Before that, however, I'll also be reading Under the Skin by Michael Faber. I don't know too much about this book. I'm going into it relatively blind because, well, originally I wasn't going to read it, but I accepted a little challenge from a new friend of mine to switch out something on my TBR, and he in exchange would also switch out something on his TBR, so I invited him to read The Left Hand of Darkness, and I'll be reading Under the Skin. However, I had heard somewhat of Under the Skin, and it did sound intriguing from the little bit I actually read / heard about it. I'll also be reading one book of non-fiction basically, and hopefully I'll finish out the first season of Foundation and do a review for that. The Wheel of Time TV show is coming out in November as well, so I'll probably do a review, initial thoughts for the very first episode. I know the official trailer dropped, but I'm not going to bother doing a trailer reaction because I don't really think I have much more to add to what I said in my initial teaser reaction. In the meantime, however, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in my dual witchy review. But until then, bye-bye.